In the season 5 finale, we see Melisandre conveniently return to the wall, moments before Jon is stabbed. And in the book, she doesn't even leave the wall, instead choosing to remain behind with Queen Selyse and the Princess Shireen. Not to mention, she's also present in the Shield Hall when Jon announces his plans to march south to Winterfell. So it's safe to say that she is likely to be close by during Jon's stabbing and therefore able to reach him in a timely manner. And despite the chaos of the moment and the fact that Jon himself is surrounded by enemies, we have to remember that the group of mutineers that stabbed Jon consist of mostly middle-aged stewards and builders rather than rangers, and consequently lack the ability to be great fighters. When Marsh, Whittlestick, and their co-conspirators stab Jon, it's obvious they are terrified, crying and shaking, nearly botching the whole thing. So we can take some comfort in the fact that nearby there are several individuals who would be willing to come to Jon's aid. A huge angry giant, several rangers, thousands of wildlings, and most importantly, Melisandre. Now with this being said, if we are going with the theory that Jon will wear Ghost and leave his body temporarily, Jon's body itself would be dealt with according to how corpses are usually dealt with at the wall, burned on a funeral pyre. And so, this leads us to the first of our options. This being the resurrection of Jon Snow as Jon Targaryen and Azor Ahai reborn, with the sacrifice of the Princess Shireen Baratheon. We have all heard of the popular fan theory R+L=J and the Azor Ahai prophecy, the first of which is regarding Jon Snow's parentage, and if proven to be true, would make Jon the son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, and possibly the true heir to the Seven Kingdoms and the Song of Ice and Fire itself. In terms of the Azor Ahai prophecy, it foretells of a savior who will appear when the red star bleeds and the darkness gathers, born amid smoke and salt to wake dragons out of stone. Now that's all fine and dandy, but what does it matter if his body is about to be burned to a crisp? Well, here's the thing, if Jon truly does have Targaryen blood, and if the sacrifice of the Princess Shireen Baratheon plays the role it is meant to, it is possible that Jon's body will survive the funeral pyre and both the theory of R+L=J and the prophecy of Azor Ahai would be fulfilled. However, it's important to note that although Jon may have Targaryen blood, this does not guarantee that he would be immune to fire, as Targaryens are only shown to have a higher tolerance of heat, not complete immunity to fire. So it's likely that Jon's Targaryen blood would only aid him in the sense that he is Azor Ahai and the prince that was promised. And so it is possible that with Melisandre's use of blood magic involving the sacrifice of Shireen, Jon may remain unburned. Daenerys Targaryen would be the obvious example of this, as she not only walks out of a funeral pyre unburned but also manages to hatch 3 dragons, which is enough for many to be convinced that Dany herself is Azor Ahai. But it could also be possible that Azor Ahai is a joining of 2 people, which is where Jon comes into the picture. And if we were to assume that Jon is the other half of the Azor Ahai prophecy, who's to say that he couldn't be reborn in a similar manner to Dany? Because if we look at all the subtle details included in Jon's final point of view chapter, it does add up to be a considerable amount of evidence. To begin with, moments before Jon is stabbed, he watches Wun swing around Sir Patrick of Kingsmountain and notices his cloak of white wool patterned with blue stars, and that there is blood flying everywhere, which could symbolize the red bleeding star. Not the most literal interpretation, of course, but if you recall George R.R. Martin's words, prophecy in his world never is. And it doesn't just end there. Other aspects of the Azor Ahai prophecy, such as the smoke and salt, also seem to be alluded to in Jon's final moments. In terms of the salt, Bowen Marsh is openly crying as he stabs Jon, and when Jon pulls the dagger free, the wound is smoking. And so Marsh's salty tears and the smoke from Jon's wounds could symbolize the smoke and salt amidst Jon's rebirth. And as for the final aspect of the prophecy, the foretelling of Azor Ahai waking dragons out of stone, this could once again be read in a much more figurative sense, as the dragon the prophecy could be referring to may be Jon himself, if we are to assume R+L=J is true, whereas the stone could be the Princess Shireen Baratheon, due to both her grayscale and her king's blood. For instance, although Shireen's grayscale was prevented from spreading, for some it can spread throughout the entire body, including the internal organs, leading such individuals to be referred to as stone men. And although Shireen seems to be clear of her grayscale, in A Dance with Dragons, the wildling Val seems to think otherwise. The other very interesting point to mention is Shireen's constant fears that a dragon is coming to eat her, which once again could be foreshadowing Shireen's role in Jon Snow's rebirth. And in the show as well, it doesn't really seem that Shireen's sacrifice played the role it was meant to. I mean, sure, the weather clears, but soon after that, it all goes pretty pear-shaped for Stannis. Half his men mutiny, his wife hangs herself, and Ramsay and his 20 good men, along with the rest of the Bolton forces, decide to make a surprise appearance, and this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day ends with Stannis' own death at the hands of Brienne of Tarth. And so it brings up the question of whether Shireen's sacrifice has yet to pay off. It certainly is odd that the sacrifice of a princess of the royal house of Baratheon would only serve to clear some snow. And of course, the look of sheer disappointment on Melisandre's face in episode 9 is also very telling. It's as if she has finally realized she's been backing the wrong guy this entire time. Because if you recall, Melisandre's recent visions involving Jon have all been alluding towards him being Azor Ahai. To begin with, there is the vision in which she asks for a glimpse of Azor Ahai, but all that she sees is Jon Snow. And then of course there is her vision in which Jon's face is limed in flame, possibly foreshadowing his rebirth by fire. So it's completely possible that Melisandre will eventually put 2 and 2 together, acknowledge that Jon Snow is actually Azor Ahai, and therefore arrange for Shireen's sacrifice. And of course, there is Jon's very own dream in which he's armored in black ice and wielding a flame-red sword. But as to how Jon's spirit will actually return to his body, it's likely that Bran will have a large part to play, because as evidenced by his prior communications with Jon in A Clash of Kings, we know it's possible for green seers to communicate with other skin changers. And so it's possible that Bran will inform Jon through a series of visions the truth regarding his parentage and identity, not just as a Targaryen but as Azor Ahai, compelling Jon to return to his body, at which point Melisandre will simultaneously resurrect him with the sacrifice of Shireen. Bran's involvement is further supported by George R. R. Martin's insistence that Jon will eventually learn of his parentage. And at this point in the story, it's very likely to be at the hands of Bran, a character we know has the ability to see not only into the future but also the past. Now, although it is possible that Melisandre will immediately come to acknowledge Jon's significance, it's likely that she will attempt to consult her fires once again before taking any drastic action. And if we recall Melisandre's visions in A Dance with Dragons, she sees 1,000 red eyes, a white weirwood tree, and a boy with a wolf's face, which are obviously depictions of Bloodraven and Bran. Now, at the time of the vision, Melisandre assumes this to be the enemy, the champions of the Great Other. But it is possible her opinion will change if Bran or Bloodraven attempt to communicate with Melisandre via her visions and urge her to aid in Jon's resurrection. Now, although this is a completely plausible method in which Jon could be resurrected, there do remain 2 other equally possible options, the first of which directly involves Melisandre, making it not a very popular option but one that could work nonetheless. This of course refers to Melisandre administering the last kiss to Jon Snow. Now, although the books do feature Beric Dondarrion's resurrections at the hands of Thoros of Myr, as well as the resurrection of Lady Stoneheart, the show, very interestingly, has Melisandre actually visit Thoros of Myr and learn of his ability to resurrect Beric Dondarrion firsthand. She then conveniently arrives back at the wall moments before Jon's stabbing, and so it's completely possible that she will attempt to administer the kiss of life to Jon. The obvious drawback to this option, however, is that as with Dondarrion and Lady Stoneheart, the kiss of life method is not always the best option. As with both characters, their original memories, characteristics, and personalities seem to be diminished. In Jon's case, it is possible that if he were to work Ghost and have his body stored within the wall, the result could be different for him, and therefore allow him to retain his character, personality, and memories to a greater extent, especially considering that he would not have truly died, as his spirit would still be intact within Ghost's body. Now, as with both Beric and Catelyn, it is possible that Melisandre's kiss of life would only be effective with the sacrifice of another life, which is where Shireen comes into play again. Because as with the other option we already discussed, it is likely that Shireen would need to be sacrificed for Jon to be resurrected. The final option for Jon's resurrection would still require Jon's ability to ward Ghost and for his body to be preserved within the wall, as well as the involvement of Melisandre. However, unlike our previous options, Jon's resurrection would not only depend on his Targaryen blood and the sacrifice of Princess Shireen, but also on King's blood, in particular, Theon Greyjoy's blood. Support for this theory mainly comes from Theon's several point of view chapters in A Dance with Dragons, as well as his sample chapters for The Winds of Winter, all of which allude that he may still have a significant role to play in the future. In A Dance with Dragons, we see Theon visiting the weirwood tree in the Godswood of Winterfell on a number of occasions. And interestingly, on each occasion he feels a strange presence, at one point even hearing the weirwood tree whispering to him. When the weirwood begins to whisper his name, Theon is relieved that the old gods know his true name, and he prays to the old gods that he may die as Theon Greyjoy. Now, it's entirely possible that Theon may be imagining these supposed interactions with the weirwood tree, as he has been physically and mentally tortured for a lengthy period of time. However, considering what we know of Bran's abilities and how green seers in general were once able to communicate not only through weirwood trees but all other living organisms, it is possible that the voice that Theon hears is indeed that of either Bloodraven or Bran. And this is further supported by Theon's sample chapter in The Winds of Winter, in which the ravens seem to be communicating with him as well. As with the weirwood, we know that Bloodraven has 1,000 eyes and one, and so the constant repetition of the words tree and Theon could be more than just a coincidence. The true purpose of this communication could be to convince Stannis to execute Theon before the Heart Tree, allowing his king's blood to seep into the weirwood tree as a sacrifice to the old gods. And if we are to assume that Jon truly is the son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, the Song of Ice and Fire, it would be very fitting if sacrifices were made to both the old gods of the north and the god of light in the form of Theon and Shireen. And as for Melisandre's purpose in this, she could once again play the role of sacrificing Shireen to aid in Jon's resurrection, which as discussed earlier would be made possible due to her communication with Bran and or Bloodraven. So that's it for Jon Snow for now. It's a long wait until season 6, so hopefully this video will give you some comfort regarding Jon's fate. If not, just take a deep breath and remember Samuel Tarly's wise words. And if you haven't already got the chance, go check out some of my other videos on A Song of Ice and Fire. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys!